Shalom, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our ancestral and eternal homeland, the land of Israel. And I am here today with Rachel Moore of Moore Communications. I missed a word.
More connected communications.
More.
We like to connect people.
That's right. And that's good that we're talking about connecting, because today we're dealing with a very important issue. And anyone who's not familiar, Rachel, you are one of my go-to people about Jewish peoplehood because of your own personal story, that you come from a Reform Jewish background, and yet you went through your own journey, and here you are today living in the land of Israel as an Orthodox woman, raising a family of Orthodox Jews. So you have a very unique perspective on peoplehood and American Jewry and Reform Jewry. So thank you for joining me today, Rachel.
Thanks. Thank you.
I don't know how many people have seen this video, but I'm going to be asking you today about this video that was produced by a Ner Tamid temple, which is a Reform synagogue somewhere in New Jersey, where on Rosh Hashanah, like the holiest holiday of the year, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, right? The holiest holidays, the high holy days. They had a video of their service, which is already not following Jewish tradition, but okay, that's what they do. Take videos so people can connect with them, and they replaced the traditional reading of the prophets with reading passages from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who had just passed away on Rosh Hashanah, basically calling her a prophet. So here they were taking literary religious license, saying instead of reading the regular prophets that we're supposed to be reading on this high holy day, Rosh Hashanah, that Jews have been reading for thousands of years, we're instead going to take someone we believe and tell everyone is a modern prophet, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and we're going to read her lines as if it's a Haftarah. So with your permission, I'm going to play the video, then love to hear your thoughts and discuss it with you. All right? Here we go. There we go.
We want to pay homage to the memory of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And we had actually, as fortuitous as it was, decided that our Haftarah was going to be one that we pre-recorded. And so in a moment, you're going to see the link to go find it online. And if you want to watch the traditional version of our Haftarah, you can, of course, go there rather than what we are about to do now. But what we are about to do is pay homage to a person that was. The goal of the Haftarah isn't just an extraction from Bible in. It is also, more than anything else, to acknowledge that there are people 2,000, 3,000 years ago who were speaking out for justice. And we are blessed to have prophets in our world today. Prophets like Martin Luther King, prophets like Gandhi, and yes, prophets like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I know many of you feel broken over her death, for what she stood for what she did. And so the best way that we can honor her memory is to use her words. And so in a moment, we are going to chant the blessing for the Haftarah, page 247. And then I'll invite you to listen, as in the traditional melody of the Haftarah, we read a few key teachings, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's own words, as a way to bring out her memory and to pay homage to her. I hope you'll take these into your heart and use them for inspiration as each of you seek to make this world a better place.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nbi'im v'mecher b'torah u'b'moshe.
I'm going to skip ahead to the actual reading of their Haftarah with Ruth Bader Ginsburg words. There you go.
Allah, students, if you are going to be a lawyer and just practice the profession, you have a skill very much like a plumber But if you want to be a true professional, you will do something outside yourself, something that makes life a little better for people less fortunate than you.
Real change, enduring change, happens one step at a time. Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you.
Okay, so we got the gist of what's going on here. Thoughts, Rachel, watching this?
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to start by saying that I actually grew up with more of a conservative background than a reform one, and I make the distinction because out of respect for all of the role models and the positive influences in my life, positive experiences through the conservative movement. But I think the point that you made stands because I do come from a very different world in Judaism, and have very positive associations with that world, and think a lot and think deeply about how we can continue to relate to each other and continue the conversation in a way that's productive and effective, while at the same time maintaining the integrity of Judaism and the preservation of Judaism and what that means. And we're complicated because we're a people. And there are a lot of people who don't live in Israel who feel extremely, extremely connected to their Judaism and are very involved in their Judaism. They're involved in their Jewish community. It's very central to their Jewish identity, and don't identify with Orthodox Judaism, either from a lack of experience, a lack of education, or it's a choice, or all of the above, and express their peoplehood in a way that they identify as religion, but in a way that makes it very difficult to keep the tent big, to be inclusive and to be on the same page and have a conversation. And I think that we're in a process of transition, and we're struggling because we want to remain a Jewish people, and we want to have a dialogue with people who are different from us. I love Jews who make different choices than I do. I want to be able to have that conversation. And at the same time, I can't say that everything is kosher just because somebody wants it to be. If everything is kosher, then nothing is kosher. And distinctions exist for a reason. So where do we draw the line, and how do we make sure that there's a safe place for everybody to express their Judaism in a way that feels authentic to them and keeps them proud of being Jewish, while not declaring something, Judaism as a religion, that is heretical, that is problematic in terms of the understanding of a theology, and I don't think that there are easy answers. So it's important to me to start by saying how much I do respect people who are looking for that truth and looking for a way and are doing things out of a sincere desire to express their Judaism in a way that's authentic for them. But at the same time, I think it's really important to call out the problems and the inconsistencies where they exist. And we need to be having the conversation, and we need to be having the conversation with each other. And that includes saying, you know what, I respect your right to disagree with me, but this is crossing a line and it's not okay. So I'm going to give you my thoughts on why it's not okay. I'm not a religious leader. I do have a lot of positive associations with both worlds, and feel that we need to be having the conversation, not just religious leaders. So first of all, you jumped ahead, but I was actually really glad that you started with the blessings that they made, because this would have been different for me as an experience if they hadn't made the blessings. Now, the blessings do not say, thank you, God, for commanding us to do this. That's not the blessing that's used on the Haftarah, because it's not an explicit mitzvah. It's not a commandment to read the Haftarah in synagogue. It's a choice, and it's a tradition that's been made over time. But it is sanctifying something as being Jewish and holy and coming from God, that is used in a religious service in a different context, as a choice made by religious leaders who did not in that video explain that these are blessings that are made on something that's been handed down for thousands of generations, that was instead used as a blessing to sanctify something that was said in modern times, that two individuals decided as the head of their congregation should be elevated to the level of prophecy. They did, okay, that was not said, it was just given that blessing. The cancellation and the blessing is saying, I am putting this within the framework of religious service. In other words, I'm bringing something to the temple as a sacrifice. I'm not standing in my own backyard and saying, I consider this on the same level as any other service to God that you have. I'm bringing it within the structure and the confines of what's a religious setup, right? That has an architecture of a long-standing tradition of many, many religious leaders, and inserting something in there because I think that I should. So I want to say that first. Another thing I think it's really important to point out that he says in the video, that the rabbi says, is that prophets were activists for justice. That's what defined the prophets in Jewish biblical tradition. And that is why this is also prophecy. And the other prophets that he names are people who are known through history as being vocal activists for justice. That is a definition of a social activist, but that is not the traditional Jewish definition of what makes somebody or a prophet or not. Even more so, there are examples throughout the Tanakh of people who were social activists, who stood up. The Maccabees, right, stood up as social activists for justice and were not given the status of a prophet. So that's important because it's without any preamble, it's a redefinition. Okay, the rabbis throughout history have a theological definition of who has been given the status of prophet. And I am making a new definition and changing that. And because I've redefined that and changed it, prophecy is social activism. A social activist is equal to a prophet. And therefore, that was prophecy and this is prophecy. So that's the second thing I want to point out. I think that it's important that people in the United States are, even with a lockdown, looking to their synagogue as a place to deal with grief of a social figure, as a figure in social justice that they connect to, that when they're processing grief as a community, that they want to log online, right? And this is where they want to go to deal with it. And they want to have that conversation. For me, right, then why is this problematic? Because it's not a memorial service. It's a Rosh Hashanah service, meaning it's a service that has been at least given the framework of something else. One thing that I learned well after making the decision that I was going to live an Orthodox life, is that the root of the word holy, kadosh, is separation, is distinction. And I think that this is so pivotal and important to the core of this bigger conversation, because the clash between traditional Judaism and modern American culture is that distinction is seen as toxic and unhealthy and divisive. And with distinction comes, you automatically are putting one above the other. I cannot talk about somebody's gender or race or religion or say that this is okay and that is not okay, because I'm separating somebody from me, and that divisiveness is creating an us and them and a better and worse. And Judaism has had a lot of innovations in the world, but one of them was to say we can be radically different and still both be good and okay. It's just a time and a place. There is a time for, there's a time for certain aspects of Jewish observance. There's a time that you have to do them, and there's a time that you may not. it's the same act. And sometimes it's not only okay, it's required. And other times it's not only not okay, but you absolutely, it's forbidden. What most quickly comes to mind is if somebody's life is in danger, you are commanded, you are required to not keep the laws of Sabbath in order to save their life. There's a competing principle. So in other words, there's a time and a place, and it doesn't mean that Shabbat isn't holy and beautiful. It means that there's a time and a place to say, this is not okay. In this space here and now, there's a time for this, and then there's a time for that. And also to say, saying that we're different does not mean that there's a lack of equality. And that comes back to my decisions and my background. I grew up in a place that made incredible strides in terms of egalitarianism and creating opportunities for women within traditional Jewish practice to take on roles that had been reserved for men. And this was a huge source of pride. And because I had a background in music, from a very early age, I got very involved in that. But at a certain point, it felt like the feminism was more central to the Judaism than Judaism. And my fundamental problem with egalitarianism is that at a certain point, it didn't feel feminist anymore. And what I mean by that is, in order for us to be equal, we have to be the same, is very antithetical to Judaism. We can be equal, and we can be equally valued, and we can have a very critical central role to Judaism that is radically different. And that God made men and women instead of making everybody one gender for a reason, that people have different neurology and different biology and are created the way that they're created in order to contribute their unique contribution into the world. And that it doesn't have to be like somebody else's in order to be valued, in order to be important, and in order to be important to God. And for me personally, my big issue with that is that it lacks humility. If I'm not able to say, right, everything was created the way it was for a reason, and differences exist for a reason, and I get to define what's a prophet, and I get to decide what roles people should have in Judaism, and what I think is just as valid as any rabbi in the Talmud and thousands of years of Jewish tradition, because I'm also human, and it all came from humanity. So I'm just going to redefine what's a prophet, what's a service, what should be blessed. I'm removing the humility of understanding that I'm a part of something that's bigger than me, and that there's a wisdom there. And that for me was not what I was looking for in a relationship to God. And so that didn't work for me. And I think part of it is relevant to this film because Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a real role model in many ways for many people regarding equality for women and feminism. And that's important and that's real. And she's really genuinely inspiring. I just worry when that becomes more of a central, when somehow that gets defined as like part of the central conversation to Judaism, when it can be an important conversation to have, but isn't necessarily a Jewish one. And that it should be okay to say that. It's an important conversation to have, but it's not necessarily a theological one. Right. And so when I was first introduced to Orthodoxy, it was actually through people who grew up Orthodox and were not observant. And they said something to me, which was this huge new concept I had never heard of, which is that that's the Torah I don't keep. And what they meant by that is this beef is kosher and this pork is not kosher. And I'm going to eat the pork and I'm going to eat it and tell you that it's not kosher. Okay. But I'm not going to put a kosher label on the pork because I believe that keeping kosher is a Jewish thing and I'm Jewish and I want to eat pork. So I'm now going to define it as kosher. And that's why I say if everything's kosher, nothing's kosher. If you can decide, prophecy and social activism are the same thing. And Haftorah and a speech that somebody gave are the same thing. And they both can be blessed in a service in the same way at the same time because I decided, then where's the line? And why is that a problem? It's not. In a live and let live setting, it's not a problem. You can do things differently. But there is a lot of desire to, again, to stay at the same table and to have one conversation and to create a definition for what our religion is and is not in a way that we can all abide by. And that's a problem. And when people say, well, I don't, you bringing this example of pork, I don't say that pork is kosher. You don't yet. But if you can say, well, you say that's a Haftorah and I say that this is a Haftorah, there really isn't that much of a difference. So I wish I could offer you some great answers. And I think that my objections come from a place of concern for us, because I want to continue the conversation. But I don't know if people who don't adhere strictly to orthodoxy can understand why it's offensive.
Right.
And like I have very, very dear friends who are Catholic, and they observe in a Catholic church, and that's their religion, and that's the way they want to do things. I would not bring my Jewish ritual and observance into their church, and I would expect them not to bring their Catholic rituals into my synagogue out of respect for what I do. And I would expect them not to mimic them or mock them, right? To copy them, but then change it up would be offensive. If I were to do that to a different religion, that would be offensive. And that's what it feels like. I don't fault anyone for wanting to have a conversation or memorialize or talk about their feelings of respect for the contributions to the world that Ruth Bader Ginsburg left behind. But it feels like a mocking of traditional ritual and a saying, I get to decide. I get to decide where the line is. I get to decide what's prophecy. I get to decide what belongs in a traditional service. I get to decide a blessing that has existed for thousands of years. I get to decide if I want to make it on something different. And I get to use that tune that is only used for one thing ever, and use it for something else because I feel like it, because I feel like it makes sense. And I think that as important as it is for somebody who is within the Orthodox fold to keep an open mind and respect other people's views and where they come from, it's a lack of respect for our tradition. It's a lack of respect for people who are observant, and that it's okay for us to say it's offensive too. Right. I don't begrudge anyone choosing to worship in the way that they see fit. Where I have an issue is when it compromises me or my ability. And in this case, I think it undermines the ability to have a unified conversation. It really undermines the commonalities in the religion and takes it to a place that makes it very difficult for us that do want to sit down together and talk to do so.
Right. It's very, very interesting that you brought up the concept in Judaism of the holiness in differences, right? And you actually said the word itself encompasses that. Every Shabbat, traditional Jews, we end the Shabbat with a very, very special blessing that I don't believe has been as important to our beings of Judaism and what we bring to the world than today. And I'm referring to the blessing of Havdalah, and I'll call it the blessing of differences. And if you ask me, I actually have a series of videos on prayer, Jewish prayer, and this is one of my top 3 blessings regarding what the importance of Judaism, what it gives us as individuals and humanity. And it's exactly that. It's a blessing that we're saying there is a difference between the Sabbath and the other days of the week, difference between day and night, difference between the Jewish people and other nations. But it's referred that there's a difference in everything, and that that isn't just okay, that's celebrated. That's a concept that Judaism brings to the world. It's harnessing, you can only harness the unique aspects of each thing if you celebrate the differences in everything. If the second you make it all the same, then you're not able to harness the differences to make your life a better place, to make you a better place, to make your relationship a better place, to make the world a better place. Nowhere, no other time in history do I believe that this blessing of Havdalah is so important to be internalized, not just by humanity, but by traditional Jews ourselves, than now, when the lines are being blurred for everything. And the other point I wanted to follow up with you as well is there is something about the social justice movement that is very black and white, good or bad, good or evil, values. If you don't believe this, then you're bad. And even that, in Judaism, we have King Solomon in Kohelet. We just read Sefer Kohelet, and it's a famous song. Was it Peter, Paul, and Mary? A time to every season, right? To every season, there is a time for peace and a time for war. Now, it sounds so simple, but in today's 21st century, even that is controversial to say, because in the social justice atmosphere we live in, war is evil. War is bad. You can never go to war. And even geopolitical diplomacy today is doing everything to stay away from war. But wait a second. Sometimes war is necessary. So yes, it's bad, but sometimes you have to go to war in order to bring about good. So there isn't anything absolute. There's a time for everything, even things that you might think is totally bad. And again, we're going into differences and going into nuance, which Judaism, traditional Judaism, brings, that I believe, in following up what you're saying, is being lost in not just in non-Orthodox Judaism, because I believe this Western culture of social justice is seeping into our own communities, Orthodox communities, not just in America, but also in Israel, and that's a fear of mine. Any follow-up thoughts to all of that?
I want to make a shameless plug. I'm in the middle of reading a book. I'm almost done, called Never Alone, which is written by Gil Troy and Natan Sharansky. It just came out. Anyone who's listening to this should read this book. I love the book, and it's written so well, and it's fascinating. And Avi, I mean, anyone who grew up involved with the U.S., with the Soviet Jewry movement.
I remember.
It's like reading your own experiences is so fascinating. But like Sharansky's perspectives on what Americans were doing back when we were all, standing there, it's fascinating. But the book explores 9 years of him being in prison, and 9 years of him being in the Knesset, and 9 years of him being in the Jewish Agency. But it really is a book about peoplehood and understanding how many different people came to the fight for Soviet Jewry from a different place, and how they didn't get along at all, and they didn't agree, but they had this common goal. And what did that mean? And what do we do with the cacophony? What do we do with the mess? Why the mess? Why the cacophony is holy? Why we need it? And it's so central to this issue, and how we're not there yet. And he talks about the fact that the difference between being a dissident and being a politician, and that a dissident has to be black and white. No, I'm on a hunger strike. That's it. The efficacy of a dissident is to not compromise and to sit in jail. That's how they do what they do. And that politics can't work that way. But a dissident can't work like a politician. A politician can't work like a dissident. Again, time and place. That
Right.
There's a time for that black and white for change, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it always has to be there. And it's tied together with this idea of how do we grapple our peoplehood? How do we reconcile being a nation and being a religion, and that they're not the same thing? And I think in Israel, we're trying to find this way to be a state that manages, a religion and be a religion and be a state. And we're not there yet. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done to figure it out. But for people outside of Israel who identify with Judaism as a peoplehood, but are expressing it through religious practice because they're not in Israel, it's deeply problematic. And that there needs to be a way to connect to your Judaism that you feel good about, but doesn't mutate Judaism and take away from what it is and what it's not. and leaves the distinction holy, like leaves that which is kadosh, kadosh, and allows for to say that there's difference for a reason. And again, it is with an absence of judgment. It's such a deep idea that Judaism isn't a proselytizing religion, because at the core, it's saying God made non-Jews. He didn't give us a truth that he said what had to be everybody's way of doing everything. He said there's a different thing for different people and different, and even the construct of the tribes. The people of Israel didn't work if they didn't have all of those parts, but each part had to stick to its identity and its tribe, and had to respect difference. They had to respect the lines and respect the boundaries and say, this is not that. I would not expect Ruth Bader Ginsburg to get an award for being the top medical doctor of the year. And to say that does not take away from any of her accomplishments. I would expect her to be acknowledged and held up within the judicial system, because that's where she chose her contribution in the world. She did not choose to be a Jewish religious prophet. That's not the choice that she made in the world. And to say that that's what she was is no less a problem than to stand up and say, what a fantastic surgeon she was. She wasn't. She was something else. And it's okay to say she was this and not that, with conviction and respect. And I hope, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity for us to talk about it. I think there are people who don't know necessarily that video could bother or offend anyone. But I also hope that there are a lot more open conversations. I think we have a long way to go. I think there's a lot of work to do, and finding that healthy balance that keeps God in the middle.
Right. No, I mean, listen, even though I personally grew up religious all my life, but I have plenty of family members who are unaffiliated, Jews living in America who are unaffiliated, some even intermarried. So I'm very familiar, close up with what's going on with American Jewry. With all that, my belief as a Jew and my belief in peoplehood and under the historical understanding of the Jewish people is, we're all Jews regardless of how religious or not religious we are. It doesn't make a difference. And I love and respect every. Right now I'm referring to the Jewish people, so I respect everybody, even non-Jews. But in talking about the Jewish people, I respect all Jews regardless of how religious or not religious they are. I love them as brothers, and I respect them, and I'll talk with them, and I'll argue with them, and that's fine. And I have, on the one hand, I don't have a problem with someone doing something that's what helps them connect to their Jewish identity, even though it's not traditional and it's not tradition. My problem with it is, again, we're talking about a rabbi and the leadership of a congregation. And my biggest beef, what hurts me in seeing things like this, is that's not what's going to keep the young Jews of that congregation Jewish. That's going to push them away. If Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a prophet, and I could choose any Supreme Court judge or any lawyer or any politician or any policy to be my Judaism, then they don't need Judaism. The authentic Judaism of what so you could be a good person and believe Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a prophet, and why do I need synagogue? Why do I need prayer? Why do I need Israel? Why do I need the Jewish people? I don't. I could just choose whatever I want to do, and that's that's where my pain comes from. I'm not upset at them. I don't want to kick them out of the tent. I'm crying inside because that's just more of that community whose children and grandchildren are no longer going to be part of the Jewish people because of how their leadership is leading them astray to what they're defining as Jewish values, what they're defining as what we can do as Jews, which basically, like you said, well, if this is kosher, then everything's kosher. Then I don't need to be Jewish. I don't need. What do I need the headache of the Jewish people and a connection to Israel? And that's my thing about witnessing all of this.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. You know, if the Rosh Hashanah service is a memorial service for somebody that just passed away, then why not go to a memorial service? Why do you need to go to a Rosh Hashanah service? And for the older generation, where that's their community and the people that they know, then it makes sense. But you're right. For the next generation, why bother? And it's really sad. It is very sad. And I think the continuity conversation would be more effective if we were allowed to say everything that we need to say out loud. It's difficult. You know, I agree with you. I think there has to be honesty with respect, right. But that there's value in the argument, right. That we need to be having it.
Right. There is so much more to get into. I think we went into this enough for now, Rachel. Thank you so much for your insight. Always a pleasure talking to you in general. Even more so talking about this issue. As you can see, I mean, it's a very, very important, dear issue to you. It's a very important issue to me. Hopefully people listening are enjoying the conversation and opening up their minds in more ways than before. And again, the bottom line is we want to bring about a strengthening and unification of the Jewish people by talking about this. It's not about kicking people out of the tent or making them feel bad because they're doing things we disagree with, rather taking it in order to have this conversation so we can be together, even though we have differences. So hopefully people
I really appreciate it, Avi. It's always a pleasure. Let's keep talking about the Jewish people.
Amen. Amen. All right. Thank you, Rachel. Moadim l'simcha.
Take care. Moadim l'simcha.
And to all the viewers, I just want to thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode today with Rachel Moore of More Connected Communications. And as you can see, her whole persona and what she's, whether professional or not, it's about connecting. And everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and enjoy the rest of the Sukkot holiday. Shalom, everyone. Thank you very much for watching.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.